Any doubt that Dominic Cummings doesn't have the full force of the UK's political establishment up against him was put to bed this week in two jaw-dropping incidents. First, there was the tweet sent from the official UK civil service account branding Boris Johnson and his assistant arrogant and offensive, and adding, "Can you imagine having to work with these truth twisters?" That shows how the machinery behind our antiquated system of government is doing everything it can to ambush this exciting new regime. Then the BBC's ridiculously thin veil of being an impartial news organisation was dropped in spectacular fashion. The corporation's star news presenter, that's what you've got to remember about Emily Maitlis. She's the person who we trust to bring us impartial news on election nights. But she delivered a rant on Newsnight that would have made Owen Jones proud. She stated as fact, Cummings broke the rules. We now know from the Durham police he didn't. She then had the temerity to state that she was speaking on behalf of the country. She wasn't. The Beeb's news output has become increasingly partisan over the past few years, with Newsnight now a hotbed of lefty outrage, especially after the hiring of the campaigning reporter, and I use that word loosely, Lewis Goodall, who previously worked for a prominent left-wing think tank. On both these occasions, the bias was so obvious and so extreme that bosses had to take action. The civil service have launched an investigation into the very telling tweet, but perhaps actually it was the BBC's reaction that was most significant. At this time yesterday, as Boris Johnson, as you know if you were listening, was grilled by MPs at the Liaison Committee, they released this extraordinary statement admonishing Newsnight and Emily Maitlis' biased rant. In it, the bosses did something they hate to do, admitting the coverage on BBC Two's flagship news programme did not meet the impartiality required. The swift response cannot be the end of the matter, as it calls into question the entire way Newsnight is run. So I have some questions. Who wrote the left-wing piece of political prose suitable for a Guardian columnist and decided it was fit to broadcast during a public service news bulletin? Who then approved that statement to go on air? And did Newsnight's editor refer the matter to her superiors before broadcast? What is going to be done from now on to ensure Newsnight no longer operates as a blatantly anti-Boris Johnson broadcast? By the way, I'm not for a single second calling for anyone to be sacked. If the Dominic Cummings saga proves anything this week, it's that pitchfork-style protests outside houses and confected social media outrage by liberal journalists should not be allowed to drive good folk out of their jobs any longer. Of course, Emily Maitlis should be able to ask tough questions of the government like all journalists. But given she is a news presenter paid out of public funds, not a commentator, not an opinion columnist, we need to know in the future that correct checks and balances are in place. Overall, I would say this has been an unseemly week for political discourse in this country. I agree with the Prime Minister that it is now time for his party and previously loyal MPs to move on. Let the BBC and the opposition eat itself over Dominic Cummings, but let the Prime Minister get back to governing during an unprecedented national crisis.